Chapter 12. At first I resented the idea of being thought of as a murderer. Gradually it began to look not so improbable.
Why not? It had been an evening of strange lapses. I could not remember what I had said or done to bring on all the fuss around me that evening at the temple hall.
Later it was quite possible that I had battered someone's skull and remembered nothing of it. Going over my own actions step by step, I remembered that I had gone up the staircase stealthily, opened the door on the landing. So far it was clear.
The procession was in the street below. Vasu was lying in a long chair beside the window. I had crawled toward his gun and run out when the alarm clock screamed.
Between my entrance and exit, I remembered holding the gun at Vasu's head until the lights of the procession vanished. Perhaps while he slept I had rammed the butt of the gun into his skull. Who could say?
But what about the time of his death? The corpse doctor had declared that the man must have died at 11 in the night, long before I had sneaked up the attic stairs. After all, the doctor might have hazarded a guess, one more item in a long list of conjectures.
I had clung to a hope that Rangi might have poisoned Vasu and then smashed his head, but the chemical examiner at Madras reported no trace of poisoning. With that, the last trace of hope for myself was also gone. While I sat in my press all alone, I caught myself reconstructing again and again that midnight visit to the attic, trying to gain a clear picture of the whole scene, but each time I found it more confounding.
When people passing Market Road looked at me, I averted my head. I knew what they would be saying. There he sits. He ought really to be hanged for murder.
My friends of Mempi village never came near me again. They had had enough trouble with police and everything for the sin of knowing me and visiting my press. That press.
Lord Shiva. Accursed spot, keep away from it. There was not a soul with whom I could discuss the question.
Sane avoided me. The poet was not to be seen. He took another route to the municipal school.
During my morning trip to the river and back, no one stopped to have a word with me. The adjournment lawyer and the rest hurried on when they saw me at a distance. Still one morning I accosted the adjournment lawyer at the bend of the street where the barber's house abutted.
He pretended not to see me and tried to pass. "Sir," I cried, stepping in front of him. He was flurried.
"Ah, Nataraj. Didn't notice, I was thinking of something. I want to ask you," I began. "What about?"
"What about?" he asked feverishly. "You see, I am out of touch with criminal practice. You should really consult. Consult?"
"For what purpose? I have no problems." "Oh, yes, I know," he cried, fidgeting uneasily.
I remember that they left an open verdict. Nothing was imputed or proved. After all, who can be sure? "Oh, forget it," I said with the casual ease of a seasoned homicide.
"It is not that. I am more worried about the collection of dues from my customers." "When did you celebrate your daughter's marriage?"
"Months ago. Why don't you pay my charges for printing those invitation cards? What are you waiting for?"
"Oh, yes, by all means," he said, edging away. "I have no one in the press to help me. Even Sastri has left me."
"You had better send the cash along instead of waiting for me to send someone to collect it." A touch of aggression was creeping into my speech nowadays. My line of thinking was, so be it.
If I have rid the world of Vasu, I have achieved something. If people want to remain squeamish, they are welcome to be so, but let no one expect me to be apologetic for what I have done. I was hardening myself with such reflections, and suffering at the same time.
The press was silent. I kept my office open at the usual hours. Visitors were few.
I spent my time attempting to read Tolstoy's War and Peace, discovered among the 70 terse philosophical volumes in the family lumber room, and diverted myself by following the complex fortunes of Russian nobility on the battlefields of ancient Europe. I caught sight of the poet one morning beyond the fountain.
Before he could detour and take another route to his school, I ran forward and blocked his way. I implored him to con into the press and seated him in the Queen Anne. "What has happened to you all?"
I asked. "They have added 8 more hours of work every week for me, with so many teachers absent." "Ah, innocent poet.
What clumsy guile you have cultivated within these few weeks." I asked. "What about Sane?" "I don't know. He was expecting a call from a Madras paper." "Don't lie,"
I cried, suddenly losing my temper. Haven't I seen him sneaking in next door to get some work done on Heidelberg? You people are avoiding me.
You think I am a murderer? He remained silent. I checked myself when I noticed the terror in his eyes.
He glanced anxiously over his shoulder at the doorway. He noticed the glint of a maniac in my eyes. I wanted to speak to him about the accounts entombed in the green folder, about the monies collected on his behalf and spent away by Vasu, and I wanted to explain to him about the tiger cub I had seized.
But all that I could produce was a shout of abuse at the world in general. I realized that I was frightening the poet. I modified my tone to a soft whisper, smiled, and patted his back.
I said, I want to give you a present for all the money collected for your benefit. Something in kind, something salvaged. I fixed him with a look lest he should try to escape, flicked open the roll-top desk, and brought out the stuffed tiger cub.
I pulled off the kerchief covering it and held it to him. He looked transfixed. Tiger.
What for? It is yours, take it, I said. He valued it at 2,000. Something at least.
He reared his head back and gazed on me as if noticing in my eyes for the first time unplumbed depths of lunacy. He pleaded desperately, no, I don't want it. I don't need it.
I do not want anything. Thanks. T-H-A-N-K-S.
He suddenly shot out of Queen Anne, dashed out, and was soon lost in the crowd. Poet. Poet.
I cried feebly. In addition to being a murderer, perhaps he thought I had embezzled his funds too and was playing a prank on him now. This was the greatest act of destruction that the man-eater had performed, destroying my name, my friendships, and my world.
This thought was too much for me. Hugging the tiger cub, I burst into tears. While I was in this state, Sastri parted the curtains and entered.
I came by the back door, he explained briefly. Ah, Sastri. I cried in sheer joy.
I thought you would never come back. He was businesslike, completely turning a blind eye on my emotional condition. After the marriage at Karaikudi, my wife insisted on going on a pilgrimage to Rameshwaram.
And to a dozen other places. A couple of children fell ill on the way. I was fretting all along to get back, but you know how our women are.
Sickness or otherwise, my wife insisted on visiting every holy place she had heard of in her life. After all, we were telling ourselves, we get a chance to travel only once in a while. You could have dropped me a postcard.
True, he said, but when one is traveling, it is impossible to sit down and compose a letter, and the idea gets postponed. He took out of his pocket a tiny packet containing a pinch of sacred ash and vermilion and held it to me with offerings from all the temples mixed together. I daubed the holy dust on my forehead.
He noticed the tiger cub on my lap and said, "Ah, what a tiny tiger." As if huming a child. His silver-rimmed spectacles wobbled, and his face was slightly flushed.
I knew he was shuddering at the sight of the stuffed animal, still he pretended to be interested in it and stretched out his hand as if to touch it. He was trying to please me. He said, "Must have been a pretty baby in the forest, but what a monster it becomes when it grows up."
Did he give it to you? Lai asked after a pause. I couldn't explain that I had stolen it from the dead man.
I meant to give it to the poet, I said, but he went away, spurned it and went away. I was on the point of breaking down at the thought. He may not come again.
It is natural that a poet should feel scared of a tiger. In any case, what could he do with it? He may never come this way again.
So much the better for us. Anyone who refuses to come here and waste our time must be viewed as our well-wisher. KJ is our customer, and you may be sure he will always come to us.
Naturally. Where can he get the magenta even if he wants to leave us? People who have business with us will always come and keep coining.
Everyone thinks that this is a murderous press, I said gloomily. He gently laughed at the notion and said, "They are fools who think so, but sooner or later even they will know the truth." Pray, what truth?
I asked. Rangi was with him when he died. You know I am on the temple committee, began Sastri, and she came to see me on business last evening.
I had a feeling all along that she was hiding some information. I refused to listen to her problem last evening unless she told me the truth. Much against my principles, I called her inside the house, seated her on a mat, gave her coffee and betel leaves to chew, and induced her to speak. My wife understood why I was asking this woman in,
and treated her handsomely on the whole. What did Rangi say? I asked impatiently.
It seems that evening she carried a hamper of food to him. He refused to eat the food, being in a rage over many things. Rangi had perhaps mixed some sleeping drug with the food, and hoped that he would be in a stupor when the procession passed under his window.
That was her ruse for saving the elephant that night. But the man would not touch the food. He might not have felt hungry, I said, remembering the eatables that I had plied him with earlier that day.
It might be so, but it embarrassed the woman because she had duties at the temple that night. She was really bothered how she was going to get out of the place. When he understood that the procession might start late, he set the alarm clock and laid himself in his easy chair.
He drew another chair beside his and commanded the woman to sit down with a fan in hand and keep off the mosquitoes from him. He hated mosquitoes, from what the woman tells me. He cursed the police for their intrusion, which made him break his court frame to show off his prowess, compelling him now to stretch himself in an easy chair instead of sleeping in his cot protected by mosquito net.
Armed with the fan, the woman kept away the mosquitoes. He dozed off. After a little time she dozed off too, having had a fatiguing day, as you know, and the fanning must have ceased. During this pause the mosquitoes returned in a battalion for a fresh attack.
Rangi was awakened by the man yelling, "Damn these mosquitoes!" She saw him flourish his arms like a madman, fighting them off as they buzzed about his ears clamoring to suck his blood. Next minute she heard a sharp noise like a thunderclap.
The man had evidently trapped a couple of mosquitoes settled on his forehead by bringing down the flat of his palm with all his might on them. The woman switched on the light and saw 2 mosquitoes plastered on his brow. It was also the end of Vasu, concluded Sastri, and added, that fist was meant to batter thick panels of teak and iron.
He had one virtue, he never hit anyone with his hand, whatever the provocation, I said, remembering his voice. Because, said Sastri puckishly, he had to conserve all that might for his own destruction. Every demon appears in the world with a special boon of indestructibility.
Yet the universe has survived all the Rakshasas that were ever born. Every demon carries within him, unknown to himself, a tiny seed of self-destruction, and goes up in thin air at a most unexpected moment. Otherwise, what is to happen to humanity?
He narrated again for my benefit the story of Bhasmasura the Unconquerable, who scorched everything he touched and finally reduced himself to ashes by placing his fingers on his own head. Sastri stood brooding for a moment and turned to go. He held an edge of the curtain, but before vanishing behind it said, "We must deliver KJ's labels at least this week."
I will set up everything. If you will print the first color. When you are gone for lunch it will be drying, and ready for second printing when you return.
Yes, Sastri, I am at your service, I said.